to this workshop. We know this is a really busy time in the year, and hope you guys are all doing well with your assignments. And the whole devs team really appreciate you guys making time and efforts come to the workshop. And please feel free to reach out to us if you need any help. Yeah. And as always, we want to thank to our sponsors. Our gold sponsors are Potentia, FNZ, Centrality. Server sponsors Zero, Serato, Optiver, and Alassian. We want to thank you. Without you, we couldn't run all our workshops. So thank you so much. And yeah, also. So most of you may heard about Linux or even use Linux in some uni courses. However, despite being one of the most popular operating systems, Linux still seems like a mystery to lots of people. For all the Part 2 software people, I believe you've used Linux a lot for your 2.6 projects. But today we are going to use the bash scripts and Linux you guys familiar with to do something different. So stay tuned and also pay attention to all the contents and theories we cover, because there are some awesome prizes at the end for the questions. Yeah. So for all of you who is not quite familiar with Linux, when you come to this workshop, you may wonder, what is Linux? Like, why do we use Linux, and how does Linux work? Or even, why should I learn Linux? So these are all very valid questions. So today, in today's workshop, we will go through the basics of Linux and answering the questions you may have and introducing some useful tools you can use on Linux, and lead you through a project where you can utilize all the tools that you learn from this workshop and create something meaningful and useful. So to start off, what is Linux exactly? So in short, it is a free open source operating system based on Unix. So although it was founded by Linus Torvalds originally, since it's open sourced, currently more than 15,000 people actively participating in development. So you may heard about Ubuntu a lot, because that's the most popular distribution, but Linux actually has over 600 distributions. And it is currently the most popular open source OS. So you may wonder how popular Linux is. Here are some data that can tell you the story. So over 90% of the public cloud workload running by Linux, and over 54% of the most powerful supercomputers operated on Linux in 2020. And moreover, 23 out of 25 most popular websites in the world, such as Google, running on Linux. So you may question, why do developers use Linux, or why do developers prefer Linux? Before going to that question, let's have a look of the Linux architecture just for a bit. Don't worry too much if this looks so complicated. We won't go too deep into this, because we might cover the operating system details in the following or upcoming workshops. So as an operating system, Linux has all the key parts an operating system should have, such as file system, memory management, processors, or drivers. But what makes Linux different from other operating systems? Here are 4 key reasons behind this. Firstly, Linux kernel. The Linux kernel, for all of you who are not familiar with kernel, it is actually the core of the operating system, and it has the complete control over everything in the system. So users using the Linux preferred by the Linux kernel, because as an open source operating system, they can access to the source code of the kernel and alter the code according to their needs. For organizations or companies who have special needs of the operating systems, they can use Linux kernel as a base and modify any parts of the Linux kernel as they wanted to accommodate their needs in the manufacturing or business environment. And secondly, it's free and open sourced. This is one of the most important advantage over other operating systems such as Windows or macOS. It's free to download, use, and share in any way you want. And you can also contribute to development of the open source operating system, just like we mentioned before. And you can actually customize your Linux interface as you want it. So you can have a unique operating system just for you. And thirdly, the speed or performance is also an advantage for Linux over other operating systems such as Windows. So Linux actually uses less RAM and CPU when running the same program. So it can run faster than Windows in some cases. So it tends to be more efficient and more stable than Windows. And lastly, we have the security. It is actually the most secured operating system. And this is because there are locks on every layer of the operating system, which prevents the system from getting hijacked. And it is unlikely that you get virus on your Linux system, so your file and information will be safe on the system. And here is a list of all the reasons behind why developers like Linux. It is noteworthy that there are tons of apps that are natively developed for the Linux system. So it allows developers to use the native apps, which are lightweight and easy to use, so that their development process can be efficient and easier. So now we are going to dive into the useful developer tools on Linux that can help you upgrade your software development. Firstly, the most important and most common and basic one is the command line tool. It is also known as shell, terminal, console, command prompts on many other operating systems. So on Linux or on Ubuntu, it is called terminal. The app is called terminal itself. But we commonly use the bash shell for the standard shell. It is a shell that is implemented for the terminal, and it allows you to perform many tasks efficiently. It is also a command language that you can write a script in. You can therefore execute the script in the bash shell by calling the bash scripts. Yep. And here is a really interesting and important part of the bash script, which all the bash script must have this at this beginning. It is referred to as Shebang in some cases, and it is used to tell the Linux about the interpreter that you want to use. So in this case, the bash. Yep. And I'll just go over some useful commands for bash. Most of these are often used when developing or using the Linux operating system. I believe some of you have already covered this in the courses such as 206, but it would just be a good revision, like before we dive into the project in the second part of the workshop. So firstly, we have the echo command. It is the most used command in the Linux command line. So by using this command, you can output the text on the screen, or you can output it to a file. The common syntax you want to use is echo plus option plus string, or you can just echo the string directly and it will show up on the shell. Next, we have the pseudo command. This is the command that root all the commands on your command line. It stands for super user do, and it can help you to fix the access denied errors that you get when accessing some files you don't have access to, or when downloading something. So if you add the pseudo prefix to the command, you basically give the command the elevated privilege, which allow you to perform some tasks that require higher privileges. So by using this, you just need to add the command after the sudo, and you may need to enter the password. This is just to tell the system that you actually have the privilege to do the task. And then one of the most important command is also the apt-get. This is a command that is used to handle all the packages in Linux. It is actually a package manager for most of the Linux distributions. But just to note, for some Linux distributions, you may have different package managers like Yum, Pacman, but for Ubuntu and some other common distributions, apt-get is a useful package manager you can use. And it is also one of the first things you want to do when downloading or installing your Linux system, is to use apt-get to upgrade your system to the current latest version. So it is a really useful command. Here is just an example for how you want to use the apt-get. It is really simple. You just need to enter the package name after the install, which I believe some of you have already covered this in your previous projects. And the next very useful one, which I use a lot, is Diff. This is a command that can compare two different files and to find the different lines of code that you have in your files. So instead of downloading a different like file or like a different software for finding the differences between files, you can just use this command. It is really handy. Yep. And then we also have a command called grep. This is also a most used command in the Linux shell. It's used to find the text in the given file. So you can, just like the example shows on the screen, you can find the purchase in the text, which will show up all the occurrence of the purchase text in the file. So yeah, just like Diff, instead of using the IDE to do this, you can just use the command line. Yeah, and another tool is called Vim. This is actually not a command, but it's text editor that is developed for Linux. Most of the Linux distributions should have this installed when you install the Linux system. So it can also be accessed through the command line. So you can, instead of downloading another text editor, you can just use this. And yeah, so Guinea is another free and open sourced text editor that can perform like a basic IDE, which can help you reduce the load time, because it is designed to have short load times and limited dependency on separate packages. Yeah. And from now, I'll introduce some useful commands that you will use in the project that we'll be covering. So firstly, the core command. So it stands for client URL, which is used to transfer the data to and from a server. It lets you to talk to the server and follow the protocols such as HTTP and HTTPS, and can run on almost every platforms. So the reason why we're using this is because it is a really useful tool that can retrieve data from APIs, which is just a link that you can put after the command. So yeah, we will be covering this in the second part. So if you don't know how to use this, it's okay. And the second one we'll be using is pipe. This is form of redirection. So it redirects the standard output from one process to another process. So if you want to direct this hello world text to a process for further processing, you can use this vertical line character in the command line to direct this standard output as a standard input to the process, so that you can further process this in another process. Yeah. And similar to the pipe, this is another redirection tool that you can use. Instead of the vertical line, you want to use the right arrow. Instead of directing to a process, this is directing to a file. So you want to specify the file name after the right arrow symbol in the command. So here, if you call this command echo hello world right arrow to file.txt, it will actually direct this hello world as a standard output to a new file called file.txt under the same directory you currently at, and then you can actually see the text in the newly created file. And now I'll pass to Shrey for the hands-on project. But just before that, I want to ask a question. And this is for a prize of mechanical keyboard. If you know the answer, just shoot in the text. We'll take the first person who answers this as the prize winner. So the question is, what are the 3 good reasons for using Linux in development compared to other operating systems? Okay, wow, that's so fast. We have Aditi as the first person. So congrats, Aditi. We'll contact you after the workshop. So yeah, congrats. And I'll pass on to Shrey for the next part.
Cool. Yeah, sure. So I'll just start sharing my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep. I just noticed we have some questions from Menti as well. We'll be addressing these at the end, so don't worry.
Sweet. So I guess like for the people who have done their like prerequisites, that's great. But for the people who haven't done them, I'm just going to go through like how you can generate API keys, because some people might not have been able to do it. So we're going to be using 2 APIs, and you can go to the repository that's in Zoom right now, and then you'll find the links to those APIs from there. But otherwise, it's just OMDB API. So you can just get that from search that on Google. And the second one is Open Rhythm app. So those are the 2 public APIs we're going to use pretty much. Now, to be able to use these public APIs, one of the things you have to do is like just generate an API key, obviously. So from the home page, you can go to this API key. I guess click on free, and then enter your details and just press submit. So you'll get an email over there that contains your API key. And then for the open with the API, I think you have to make an account first. So as you can see, I'm logged in. And then I just go to my API keys, and then I'll find my key from here. So I guess, yeah, we'll just have like a 2-minute break. And also just have a Repl account ready. So that's a pretty much like easy sign up as well. You can just use your Google or GitHub account. So I guess we'll just give 2 minutes for the people to get set up with their with these 3 tabs, and then we can continue from there. Okay, cool. So I'm assuming everyone's ready with the prerequisites. So let's get started with the actual practical session. So first of all, like, thanks Raina for getting all the basics out of the way, all the theory. So all the tools that were mentioned by Raina, we're going to be covering a lot of those, but we're going to actually be creating like 2 little utilities, I guess, in Bash. Bash scripting is like really good because developers can use Bash scripts to kind of automate their things that they do in their daily life, like what we're going to look at today. So Repl is a platform we're going to use for this this sort of an exercise because it's kind of hard for everyone to have Linux on their computers, and even installing it takes like a long time. So luckily for us, like once you're in your Repl home screen and you click this, create Repl, so you can see that Repl kind of gives you a Bash environment to play with, so you can just make your script directly on this website. So let's just name it like the first one is weather search. I'll just create the Repl. So as soon as it's made, you can see like three kind of parts to your screen, right? So one is like the files, where you can like navigate your file. We only have one right now, which is our Bash script. The second one is like the middle section for just writing out your script itself. And the last one is where you'll be able to execute and you'll be able to see the output pretty much. So first things first. So as we learned before, in any Bash script before you start, you should write this over here. It's also referred to as a shebang because what you're pretty much telling Linux is that whatever I'm about to write over here, execute this in a Bash environment, because as we learned before, there can be many shell environments, right? There's Bash, there's ZSH, and there's many more. So for us, we want to execute this in Bash. So we write that to start off. Now, the second thing we want to do is we can just echo something out. So echo is just for printing something again. So if I just run that, you'll be able to see that this is what Repl kind of writes to execute our file. And we can see the hello world being printed here, right? So very simple, and we've got something working. Now, one of the key things we're going to do today in this particular application is it's a weather search application. So we're going to be polling this open weather API here. We'll get the data, and then our goal is to save it in another file. So from this shell file, we'll create another file which will store all the weather data. Okay. So I guess first, let's just go to this API and get the endpoint we're going to be using. So let's go to pricing. Let's go to current weather. And then this is sort of the URL you're going to be using to make the request. So let's just copy that over to our environment over here. All right. I will just comment it out for now because we'll need it later on. And we're going to be using curl to make HTTP requests. Now, let's just test it with Google firstly if it works. So curlgoogle.com, okay? And if we run this, we'll just expect a whole lot of HTML to be printed out, because what curl does is it goes to google.com, which is obviously a website, and that contains HTML. So what curl does is just it gets that HTML and puts it in the console. So that's pretty much what it does. Now let's substitute Google out because we don't really want to get the HTML from Google. We actually want to get our data from the API. So let's copy this now and paste it here, right? Let's just write HTTP here just to specify the protocol. And let me just fetch my API key. So you can see that in this URL that we got from the website, there's this placeholder for API key. So that's where you'll need to like paste in your API key that you got from your email. And I guess you can get rid of this now. Now, let's try to test this out. You'll see there's one more placeholder for the city name. So that's actually the city's, like let's say if we do Auckland, we expect to get the Auckland's weather data, right? Because we're using curl. Now, if I just clear the screen, you can do that from pressing this cross icon over here. And if you just run the application, we see that, you know, a bunch of JSON is printed out. And I can actually show you this like on another tab. If I just paste that URL in another tab, you'll see that I'm getting all the information that I need, right? So I'm getting Auckland's weather data, and I'm getting my country code, which is New Zealand. So it's working perfectly fine. Now, obviously over here, when I'm using Firefox currently, so Firefox displays it in a very nice way, and we want to be able to do the same in our Bash output, right? We don't want to see this because it's not really readable. So first thing we want to do is we want to store this. Like variables are part of like any language that you use. So, and they're really important as well. So rather than just printing out the message from curl, what we want to do is that we want to store the response that you get from this into a variable. So let's do that. First thing you can do is like make a variable name called API response equals $, and then parentheses, right? And then we can copy and paste this in these parentheses. So what's happening here pretty much is that your Bash script starts from the top, it reads this, and it comes here. When it sees this particular syntax of $, followed by parentheses, what Bash does is that it executes whatever is inside this, first of all, and then the output of that will be stored in this variable, right? So if I run this currently, we don't really see any data from the API. We just see this curl data being printed out. So to be able to see the API response, we will need to print whatever is in this variable, right? So for that, we can also use echo. So we go echo and then our double quotations because we're printing a string. And then to get the data from this variable and print it out, we need to use another notation. And this is a $, followed by curly braces. And we can write API response in here. So what this syntax does is that when Bash kind of looks at this line, it sees that, okay, I need to perform a substitution here because I don't want to print this as it is. I want to take this and substitute whatever this is with the actual variable data, which is stored in here, right? So if I just clear this again, and if I run the application now, we can see that it's printing the same thing out as what we did earlier on. Now, another thing which can be quite annoying is this statistics panel, which gets printed using curl, which isn't really required all the time. So we don't want to see whether like 100% of the request has been performed or not. So to suppress that, we can use a S flag, and that's used to just suppress this information panel that we're getting, because we only really want this bit. So now if I clear it again and run the application, you'll be able to see that we're exactly getting what's expected. Now let's get back to our previous goal of kind of pretty printing this. So we don't want to see like in an unreadable format. We want it like nicely printed out, right? So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to do something similar to what we've done here. But Raina introduced us to redirecting standard output, right? So what you can do in this case is echo this JSON out. So this is JSON data. You echo that JSON out, and whatever you get from this, we're using a utility called JQ, right? So on this line, you're pretty much saying that whatever is outputted from this line over here, which is our JSON data, pass it into a process called JQ, which is used in Linux for, parsing JSON. So whenever you working with JSON, chances are you'll be working with this package, which is pre-installed in Linux. And then in this, we just want to write a dot because we want to pretty print all of the JSON, not just some bit of it. So if I clear the screen now and just run the application, you'll be able to see it in a much neater way. So whatever we had in here, we're pretty much seeing the same thing in our Linux window now. Now, one of the things that we might want to do is currently you can see that we've hard-coded Auckland, right? But that's not the ideal user experience because you might want to specify your own name for your own city name. So for that, at the beginning of the script, we can echo something out. So echo, please enter your city's name, enter colon, right? So you just telling your users that, okay, we're going to ask for your input now. So this won't really make a difference because all this does is that it just prints out, please enter your city's name, but you're not really asking the user for their input. So in order to do that, we're going to have to make another line and write read user input. So when your script is executed now, it will come to this line, it will print out this please enter your city's name, and then it will hold at this line until the user doesn't enter something and presses the enter key on the keyboard. And then we can to kind of see like whether we're getting the input correctly, we can just echo the user input over here just to see what they've written, right? So clear the screen and run again. So if I just write like Auckland, so we can see that, okay, it's at least being printed out again. So which means that we're actually getting the user's input successfully. Now, all we need to do is we're going to have to get this. So we can be sure now that whatever the user enters will be inserted into this variable. But all we need to do now is somehow get it in this. So the process of doing that, fortunately for us, is very similar to what we did over here. So you can just use bash substitution here again. So we've got our curly braces and then the variable name in between. So we've got user input. Cool. So now if I clear this again and run it, Auckland. Okay, so we can see that it's Auckland, but let's try some other city out. Let's say clear it, run it again. Let's just do Sydney, for example. And we'll be able to see that, okay, now we're getting Sydney and Australia is a country. So we know we're getting the right output finally. So, we've used some pretty basic stuff like echoing out some text, reading the user's input, using curl for the request, obviously, making some substitution here so that Linux bash knows that, okay, I need to inject whatever is in this into the string over here. And then you've got pretty much just basic piping going on into this process. Cool. So now let's say we actually want to take this and output it into another file, okay? So that's, rather than printing out in this terminal, we want to take this data and print it out in another file. So for that, firstly, what we need to do is we need to save this data somewhere instead of just printing it, right? For doing that, we can do something very similar to what we've done here using this syntax. So $ and parentheses. So we can do pretty JSON is equals to, you've got this syntax again. And within that, you want to copy and paste this line. Because what you want it to do is when it gets to this line, you want it to execute this, and whatever output that gives, you want to assign it to this variable. And to confirm, again, you can just print it out. There. Sweet. So we're getting the same pretty output again. Now, let's say rather than, as I said before, rather than printing out in here, let's say we want to make a new file, okay? So for that, Raina also introduced us to this operator. So this is redirection. So it's very similar to piping, but piping is used for redirecting this output to another process. While if you use redirection, you're kind of redirecting the output to another file, like a new file overall, not anything within bash, like a whole new file. So in this, all we need to do is specify the name of the file. Like this can be something like output.json, because it is JSON data we've got over here. Now, if we clear this, run it again, let's do Auckland this time. Yep. So you'll see that nothing really gets printed out here, but you've got this new file being created, right? So if I go to this, you'll be able to see that everything that we've retrieved from the API has been saved to this file. And this sort of a script can be really helpful when you're like scraping data off an API, Like I could schedule this script to run every like 10 minutes if I'm collecting heaps of data, and it can just be automated just like that, rather than you having to make a request through your browser and then saving it manually. Now, another extension I'd like to add to our current script is, rather than just naming it output, let's give it like a custom name, right? So for doing that, we just say time is equals to an execution block again. And then we can use this. So date plus this line over here. So what this is going to do is it's going to give us the number. So in programming, this is a common thing. So this thing like anything in Linux, time is usually measured in the number of seconds elapsed after 1970. So 1st January 1970. That's a convention that's often used in programming, right? So we're going to use that as a naming convention, and we're just going to make a file using that as a file name. So let's, rather than using output.json as a file name, let's just do time now. So whatever value is in here, we will assign that to the file name and then .json. Okay. And you can see that now whenever I run this application again, we will get a new file. right? And this is really coming into shape now. So now you can automate this program to run like every like 1 minute, for example, and you'll just have like heaps of files as it keeps running, right? So that's pretty much the first program done. One of the mistakes, like it's really easy to make, is that a variable shouldn't have spaces like this. So there should be no space between the variable name and the equal sign. That can often give you error, or it will always give you errors. Cool. So, yep, so since we've made this, we'll just have like a 3 to 5 minute break again, just so you can like have a look at this code and ask questions if you guys have any. I guess in that time I can ask like, I can answer one of the questions on Menti. So the first one is like, which one would be better, Genie or Vim? Vim has like, so Vim is firstly really hard to learn because like, it'll take a lot of practice because it's one of the tools that once you go start using Vim, you won't feel like using any other code editors because the amount of personalization you can do in Vim is just a lot. And plus you can use, so Vim is usually used by like power users that have like that are really good at like remembering that shortcuts. And it's just easy to navigate throughout your code if you use Vim. So that's one of the biggest advantages of Vim over any other, I guess, text editors.
Yeah. Just to add to that, for Guinea, the advantage is that it is really small, lightweighted, and is really fast. So if you want something that really fast that can still do the powerful things like supporting almost all the programming languages and packages, you can use Guinea for the text editor. But if you want to perform some powerful things, yeah, Vim might be a really good choice for you.
And for the second question, what are the chances I'll use Bash in industry? Well, to answer that, I don't think there's any role of like a Bash developer in the industry, but Bash is certainly a thing that all the developers will use sometimes in their careers, to automate something. And it's just really good to write scripts inside. So like, let's say you wanna, for some reason, make a folder that has 100 files named from 1 to 100, right? That'll be a really tedious thing to do just by hand, because you'll have to create 100 files by yourself and then rename them all, right? But that's something that can be done in Bash really easily, and it's one of the applications of Bash.
Yeah, and also, as we mentioned earlier, some stats about Linux. 90% of the public cloud is running by Linux, and like 54% are like powerful supercomputers operate on Linux. Also, the web servers, production web application servers are all running on Linux as well. These are all not come with the GUI, so you need to use the Bash for these kind of operations, which is why we're learning Bash and why you need to learn Bash as well. Yep.
Okay, cool. So I guess we'll get started with the next half. But just before doing that, I'd also like to point out one more thing, which I've kind of forgotten to tell you guys. So currently, one of the biggest problems in this script right now is that if you run this application and if you have a city that has a space in between, it won't run properly. And that's because like if I if I go in here, like if I just go to google.com, right? And then I just write Shrey Taylor, then like there's usually supposed to be a percentage 20 in between because of the space, right? Because that's what space stands for. Like that's a special character for space. So in order to take care of that, I guess what one thing we can do is we can do user input is equals to, and then have an execution block again. But what we want to do now is that we want to echo user input into the sed command, right? So what that does is that you can use pattern matching to kind of replace characters. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to replace the spaces with percentage 20 pretty much. So what we can do in this case is just so that is a pattern that will be used to kind of convert a space into a percentage 20. And we will need to do that because we're kind of sending an API response where we can't really have spaces. So let's run this and hope it works well. So let's run the application and Auckland. Or like, obviously, if you have like a city, you know, that has like a space in between, you can test it out for yourself, but that should work. Okay, cool. So for the next application, I guess let's make another Repl. And let's name this movie search. So create. Okay, so we're back to the same blank canvas that we had in the last previous exercise. So again, what we want to do is just start off with our interpreter path. So we just want to tell Linux that we're starting off with execute this with a bash program. Now let's just say like, welcome to the movie searching utility, right? And now first thing we want to do is let's ask the user for their input again, which is very similar to what we did previously. So please enter your movie's partial name, right? And then I guess we can do read again because we want to read something in from the terminal. So if I just run this now, I should be able to add something. Now let's add some white space between this first line and the second line because we don't want the UI to look cluttery. So one of the ways we can add an empty line is we can just write echo like just like this. So it just takes up an empty line. But rather than doing that, what we want to do is add this at the end of echo. So that's a new line character. So that pretty much just adds a extra new line after this line finishes. And what we also want to do is just after echo, we want to have an E flag because that E flag is just telling echo that we're going to have some escape characters. And in our example, this is an escape character. So echo just kind of looks out for those characters when it's going through the string. If I run that now, it will have some white space in between, which just visually looks much better. Now, since we're sure that we're getting the user input in this variable, we can use curl again. So now, obviously, we want to use a different endpoint now. So we can go to OMDB API. We can go to the home page actually. If we scroll down, we can see that we need this URL. So let's just copy that and bring it over into this. I'm just going to comment it out for now, which can be done using a hash. Now, to search a movie, the parameter that we need to use is an S, which the documentation says like it's used to search the movie's title, right? So let's go back, and it's going to look something like S equals, and then like let's say Harry for Harry Potter or something. And let's not forget to just put our API key in there. So yeah, that's the placeholder. So just replace that with the API key that you have. Okay, so this is what the endpoint will look like when we kind of use curl to send a request to it. So again, let's do curl, and then get this, paste it in here. And just for like testing purposes, you can just put in Harry for Harry Potter. Move this. Okay. Okay. Yep, sweet, it's back working now. So just enter anything, and we can see that we're getting a response from the API now, and we can see Harry Potter's the different movies of the series, so we know it's working. So that's a good sign. Now, firstly, let's just take this and assign this to a variable. So again, what we want to do is just have API response and then an execution block in between. So this gets executed and the output of this gets assigned to this. So let's just echo this out. And we get the same response. And again, we want to suppress this, so we can just add a S to this, to the curl. Okay, so we're getting the response that we kind of want now. Now, let's, again, we want to prettify this, okay? Because we don't want to kind of see it like this. So we can do pretty JSON equals an execution block. And then again, whatever comes out of this echo, we just pass it back to JQ. And then print out this. Okay, cool. So we're getting the response that we want. Now, one of the things you can notice is that this response has like a lot of features that we don't really require, right? Because like everything that's inside this search array, we want because those are like the individual movies that we have in the response, but we don't want these extra functionalities or extra things given by to us by the API, such as like total results and response, right? We just want to get rid of it. And one of the ways you can do that is you can do, so after this dot, what you want is, we just want to get this search array, right? So we can do dot search array. So from the root of the JSON, so starting from here, give us the search, which is this, and it's an array. We're just telling that it's an array. So if we run this again, you'll get those individual objects that were inside the array. And that's really great for us, I guess. Now, this response is still hard to work with because you can see that each object kind of spans multiple lines, and that's not really useful when you want to iterate through each of those movies. So essentially what you want is you want each of these objects to span a single line, okay? So then you can go through each of those lines and iteration becomes much easier. So for doing that, you just want to get the raw output from JQ. So Now you don't want to pretty print anymore. You just want to get all the attributes on a single line, right? So if you run this application now, yep, and just put something in here. Yep, you can see that it looks much more busy, the screen, because everything's on one line, but it's actually going to be really, it's going to make it easier for us as we move forward in this application, right? Now, we know that in this string, each line is a movie now. So what we can do now is that we can just have a while loop. Now, while loop is a feature that's offered by most programming languages. And in this case, we're going to use a while loop to go through each line. So what we want to do in this case is just do while read our line, do, done. Pretty JSON, okay? So this might feel like a lot when you look at it, but what it's, let's just break it apart and see what it's doing. So it's saying, while there is something to read, do this, and what it's reading in is this string that we're printing out over here. So the multi-line string that we have. Now to see if it's working properly, what we can do is just echo out this line variable as we iterate through it. And if everything's perfect, we'll be able to see the same response being printed again, because as it goes through each line, it will keep printing out the line again and again. Yeah, cool. So we're getting the same output, and that's kind of perfect for us. Now, let's kind of make this a bit cleaner, right? From this JSON, so you can see that each movie now is a JSON, okay? And it has a couple of properties, but we don't need all of it. We just need this title. We need this year, I guess. And we can also take this poster URL that we have. So those are the three things that we're really trying to extract from each of these lines that we have. And again, for that, we're going to use JQ to do that. So you just take this out because it was only for testing purposes. And let's do title is equals an execution block again. And what we can do here is just echo this line out, but then pipe it into JQ. And we want to extract this title value from it. So we can do dot title, because the dot is for like telling JQ to go from the root. So this is the root, and from the root we want title. And similarly, we can also do the same for the other two properties that we require. So we need year was the second one here. This will be here as well. And the last thing we need is the poster. And this is just poster again, poster, right? Now, assuming that these we've got these properties correctly, if we print them out, you'll be able to like just see those three things. So echo, let's say title, duplicate it 2 times, and then here, and then poster, right? So clear the screen, press run again. Yep, cool. So you can see that we've totally got rid of all the other JSON that we didn't need. And now we're getting everything as regular strings, which is much easier to see. And now you might see that there's still these quotation marks, which are remaining from the JSON. And it's not really like, it doesn't really look good on your GUI. So to remove that, you can use the R flag on your JQ. So R is just to give us the raw output. If you run that again, you can see that those quotation marks are gone now. Now let's make it so that the title and the year are on the same line, okay? So for that, we can take this here just remove this line completely and add a space between title and the year. So this will give us the both title and year on the same line, and then we can have poster on its own line. Cool, so we've got that working. Let's just add like parentheses around this here. So just basic parentheses. And let's add a space between each of the movies. So similar to what we did over here with the new line character, we can do the same on this line. So new line. And then remember, we'll need the E over here to tell Echo to look out for the escape characters. So run it, then cool. So we're getting a much neater output now. And you can see like the application taking form. Now, one of the things you'd like to do, like, so everything's just white currently, and it doesn't really look good on our application. So to introduce colors in our application, what we need to do at the top is define some constants for the different colors that we want. So I've gotten some codes of the documentation. So red is, and these are just color codes that you can find from anywhere off the internet, and you don't really have to memorize these. So this is for red, and for yellow, it's 33. And for getting the text back to normal, which is just white text, it's going to be 0. Cool. So after we've defined these constants, we'll use that to kind of style the output that we're getting. So let's say we want the title to be red, we want this year to be yellow, and we want this text to just be white. So what we can do here is we can perform bash substitution again. So by doing this, we're pretty much telling Linux that everything that occurs after this red substitution, like the standard output, should be red. And we want this year to be yellow again, yellow of course. So we will perform another substitution here for yellow. And after this year is kind of printed out, we want everything to be reverted back to normal, because what happens in this is that once you tell Linux to make text red, it doesn't kind of go back to default by its own. You have to kind of tell it to go back to white. So that's why we have this constant. And over here, we can tell it to go back to white. So now this should be red, this should be yellow, and everything that occurs after that, which is the poster URL, should be white. So clear and run. Oh, that did not work. Oh yes, we'll need the escape character because these are escape characters, right? So that is one of the mistakes we made. So yeah, cool. We're getting the output that we want now. And yeah, so we have forgotten to kind of, so we're still hard coding the Harry bit. We don't really want that, right? If we're taking a user input, we want to inject that value in here. So again, we can use bash substitution here. So user input, right? And then if I just clear the screen and let's do like Nemo. Yeah, so you'll see that I'm getting all of that information. Yep, so that kind of concludes the practical side of things. Now let's go back to the presentation that we had. So what we made, those two things, applications we made are like formally referred to as like bash scripts, right? And if you're hosting, like if you have Linux installed on your computer, one of the things you might want to do is, so you saw here that the current bash scripts, they have to be executed from their own directory. So you have to go into the directory and then write your bash script name to execute that file, but that's not really a good thing, right? You want the ability to execute those scripts from anywhere on your computer from just starting terminal. So to be able to do that, if you have a Linux system installed on your computer, you can go to your root folder. You can open something like Visual Studio Code, go to the root directory, and there'll definitely be a file called bash rc. So you essentially want to open that file, and in that file, you'll see like a line that starts with export path. And this string pretty much contains paths to all your script files. And so it will look something like this at the current moment. So it'll be export path, and there'll be like a list of paths. And then what you want to do is you want to concatenate the path where your script file is to the end of that. So you will use a colon, and then you will just write that path at the very end. And then you'll be able to pretty much execute your script from anywhere by using just the name of that script, and which gives you like much more, I guess, like you don't have to be in that directory while you execute that script. So yeah, so what we covered today is like why we should learn Linux. There are many advantages of it. One of the biggest ones that I find is security, because as Raina mentioned, this is like an open source operating system. So you've got like thousands of users making commits to it every day, which means as soon as the security flaw is kind of found, it will be squashed like before even like anyone can exploit it. So that's why it's really good to use Linux. Chances are, as a developer, as I said before, you'll be using bash like a couple of times, if not all the times. And one of the other advantages is obviously like you get to fully customize it, because everything is pretty much changeable to your own needs. Cool. So for the second part, for the last bit of this of today's workshop, we have another question, and this time as a prize, it's MX Master 3 from Logitech, right? So the question is that you can either like unmute yourself and talk, or you can just write it in chat, whatever one feels easy for you. So the question is, what is the difference between a pipe character, which is that straight vertical line, and redirection, which is the arrow? Redirection is for directing our streams to from files, and pipes. Yes, so that's a perfect answer, Guru Simran. So yep, we'll get in touch with you after this workshop, and then we can grab your contact details then. Cool. So are there any notices from us, Raina?
Yeah, just does anyone have any questions you want to ask?
Yep. Also, I'll put these scripts like on the GitHub as well, so you can refer back to them later.
Yep. So if no other questions, I'll hand to Sanan. So we can probably finish the workshop. This is the last workshop we have this year.
Yeah. So yeah, as Raina said, guys, this is our last workshop for the year. So rounding off the year with this. So to all of you that have come along to our events throughout the year, or even if it's your first event you're attending, thanks so much. We recognize that it takes time out of your evenings, especially now in the semester when it's busy to come along. So thanks anyways. We really appreciate it, and yeah, keep an eye out on what we're up to next year. We have a lot more interesting and cool events planned. But yeah, thanks for coming along for the ride this year. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed the workshop. So if you do have any questions, then feel free to stick around and have a chat with us afterwards. Otherwise, I believe, Raina, this is the end of the workshop.
Yeah. Yep. For anyone who received the prize, can you please message us on Facebook, so that we can send you.
Oh, I think Yue is grabbing the contact details,
Okay,
so
good.
it should be fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the end. And have you guys have a good night. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.